I was a good project manager, said, I'm going to go build my own business. I'm going to start my own business. And I went into it to build. And then I realized, wow, there's a whole lot of other stuff that's required behind the scenes so I can build. And I wasn't any good at it. So making that transition is tough. And I think it surprises thousands of people every year that they have to be the entrepreneur. If they're not good at the entrepreneur stuff, they'll lose the opportunity to do the technical stuff that they're really passionate about. All right, so Daniel and Noell Jett, welcome to the podcast. Those are busy folks. I appreciate you taking the time to be on here. So, Noell, I'm going to start with you. Let's go back to your childhood. This sounds like a therapy session, maybe, but let's go back to your childhood. And I understand that you started supporting yourself when you were 16, and that there may have been a religious cult involved. Can you tell us about your childhood?
I would be happy to talk about this. So, yes, I was raised in Missouri in a very small town in a very rural, poor part of America. And my parents were very wrapped up in a extremist religious church that kept everyone very controlled. We went to the same school at the church. We weren't really allowed to have any contact with anyone outside of our exact denomination. Even time with, family was very limited and controlled. And we were taught that we were the only ones that knew the truth and that we're going to heaven, and pants are evil, movies are evil, cards are evil, anything except, these certain things were evil. And that was all we knew. So I got a little bit older and I didn't really like it. I said, I don't really like all these rules and regulations. And I'm not sure that this is something that I really want to continue to be a part of any longer than I have to be. So I was able to graduate high school at 16, worked ahead, got all my work done, and took off into the world.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I think you mentioned that it was in a poor area. Like how would you describe I think you may have described that you grew up poor or grew up in poverty in a previous interview. Is that right? Would you say you grew up in poverty?
Absolutely. So just due to some religious constraints, due to health issues, my dad became a paraplegic when I was 12 years old, was unable to work, didn't have insurance. So we truly lived on the goodness of the hearts of those around us for a while. We lived off the land. We grew our own food, hunted, raised animals, but it wasn't because it was trendy and cool and crunchy like it is nowadays. Like, it was truly out of a necessity to do that. And as part of the church, the poorer you were, the more holy you were, so they wanted you to sacrifice and live for Jesus and keep you in poverty. So we truly didn't know, I don't think, until we got older, really how poor we were, just because it was a poor community. So we didn't really know anyone with money. So there was no contrast, like, wow, they're really rich. And anyone that did have any kind of nice things, it was, oh, they're in debt. They have credit card debt. Debt is a bad thing. Money is a bad thing. So we didn't really realize what a dire situation it was until we got older and looked back on it like, wow, that really was extreme.
In your opinion, what's the connection between success and perseverance? Because it seems like you had to persevere quite a bit as a young lady.
Go absolutely hand in hand. I mean, obviously there's luck of the draw, things that come into our life that are just amazing opportunities that we don't have any control over. But persevering and putting yourself in the best position possible that you can, so when those opportunities come into your life and allow you to take advantage of them, that's the ticket. Now, hard work, there's people that say, oh, hard work's the key to life, right? Unfortunately, my parents, I would say, are some of the hardest working people you will ever meet in your entire life. My dad is, partial paraplegic, 60-something years old, and I guarantee he could probably work my husband under the table in some situations. Just a hard working man. But unfortunately, that alone does not always equate to success. So you have to have that perseverance, working toward those things, but also the knowledge, putting yourself in places to get opportunities, and having more to it than just working hard.
Yeah. And is perseverance something people are either born with or not? Like, is it genetic, or do you believe it's something people can develop?
That's a tough one. I think that some people are born more naturally perseverant. But I do think it is something that can be developed and honed, and you can really work toward that. Like, I think I was born more perseverant in some areas, but then in other areas of my life, I've had to work hard to become more perseverant. So I think that it can be a combination of both nature and nurture.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to get into your the first dream home you built and why you built it, but I have one more question about adversity. It seems like you're pretty transparent and open about the adversity you've dealt with, and which probably has a lot to do with your social media following and how you connect with people. But some people would tend to hide their background and hide the adversity that they've dealt with, or maybe the adversity they're still dealing with. Why are you so open about your adversity?
So Daniel and I actually have this conversation a lot, because he hasn't always understood it either. Like, why do you want to talk about it? Like, why is it something that you bring up as a point of topic? Why did you write a book about it? Why is it something you continue to dwell on? For me, I never want to forget where I came from and the things that I went through. And I want the little girls out there growing up in maybe not the ideal situation, or the single moms that are back where I was in my 20s, going through things that just maybe feel unsurmountable. And just to see me and not think like, oh, well, she was just given this, or she was born to some money, or they maybe, won the lottery. I don't know. See this and just think, oh, I don't connect to her. I can't be inspired by what she's accomplished. I want them to truly know where I came from, what we've been through. We've lived in a camper. We've had, our car declined at the grocery store. We've had those tough times, yet we continue to persevere. We continue to push forward, and we're able to accomplish things greater than anything I think either of us had ever imagined.
Yeah. All right. So Daniel, you're up. You and Noell decided to build your dream home entirely on your own, which seems exciting to some, maybe seems like a nightmare to others. For a lot of our audience who are in the construction industry, they might be puzzled, like, why would somebody want to do this on their own? So tell us about that journey of building your dream home together and why it was so important for you to build it on your own.
When I was a kid, my parents built their house. I think it was in 95 or 96. And I just remember I was maybe a freshman in high school. And I just remember just walking through, the newly framed house and be like, wow, this is so cool. This would be so much fun to do. And as a kid, you're kind of involved in the things that your parents have going on, and they're making decisions or picking out countertops and flooring and bathtubs and everything else. And I just thought to myself, wow, this is like an opportunity that I would love to just pursue and go and build my own house. Why do I say with my own hands? Just because contracting and building in general is my art form. People have different outlets. And for me, that's a way for me to express myself and my need, my taste, if you will. And that's something that really for some reason, it just moves me. I've always loved to build things. As a kid, I would build fort upon fort upon fort. And that's just something that I've always really enjoyed and had a passion for. So why do it by yourself? Maybe it's partially because you want to walk away from something and say, I didn't need help from outside. Yep, obviously we got a lot of help from outside sources, but the buck kind of stops with me. I was the one who made all the decisions and made this come to fruition. And maybe it's a pride thing. You walk away from it saying, I did this myself.
So Noell, what about you? When the idea came out to build your dream house yourself, what did you think about that? How on board were you with that idea?
So it came out not long after we had started dating. And we were sitting there chatting one night, and he just started telling me about this dream he had had, back since high school. And actually, we found a piece of paper when we were cleaning out our garage a while back, and it was a box of stuff from high school. And there was a paper he had written in there with 3 goals for his life. 1, get married. 2, have lots of kids, which we now have 5. So he accomplished that one. And 3 was to build his house with his own hands. So it was definitely something he had dreamed about for a long time. And he shared that dream with me. And because of how I grew up with my dad, he was very hands-on. It was a very different way. Like, it took him 20 years, but he completely renovated the childhood home I grew up in. But it was all like, we would go pick stone out of the creek beds and then put that into the fireplace. So I had always been very hands-on with projects. So I loved it. I thought it was a fabulous idea. I don't know that I truly knew at the time how much work it was going to be. I may have thought a little differently. But just the general idea of it excited me, and we began pushing toward making that happen. Not knowing it was going to take us 7 years to happen, but knowing that that was our goal.
Yeah. So, Noell, what was the biggest unexpected challenge you ran into while building your house, or maybe planning, designing, or building your house? What was the biggest unexpected challenge?
For me, I think it was just, how are we going to do this? Like, there's the 2 of us, and Daniel is such a detailed person. Like, and he works on like finishes, flooring, tile, that kind of thing. So he wants that final picture to be perfect. So when you back up and you're putting the floor joists in place, he's got his level out there, and he's making sure every board is, just so perfect. And he says I'm exaggerating this. I don't think I am, but we'd be out there all day long, and I look back and we'd moved like 5 feet. And I was like, how in the world are we ever going to make this happen? Like, it just felt so unaccomplishable at the time. But we stuck to it, kept pushing forward, and ended up making it happen.
Yeah. So, Daniel, same question for you. What was the biggest unexpected challenge you ran into while building your own home?
Well, I'll go back to Noelle's comment. It's so funny. She's told this same story countless times. And I can remember being in the thick of it, installing those floor joists. And I mean, in my mind, I was just head down working, making sure things were right. And I've never framed an entire home myself before. I framed many rooms, many small additions, but never an entire home. And the world that I'm used to living in is, I've got a tolerance of maybe a 16th of an inch. And so in the framing world, a 1/4 inch is good enough, maybe even a little bit more, where I couldn't accept that. I couldn't accept that a 1/4 inch was close enough for framing. And because I've known that I've been on the backside of many homes that are the framers just kind of good enough, and now I've got to fix their problem. So I know if I do it right to begin with, that I'm not going to have any fighting or any plumbing or anything, or like leveling or anything like that of the studs that I'm going to have to change, because I know it's going to be correct to begin with. So yes, I was very tedious with that floor system, and as I'm working through it, she's like, okay, is it good enough? I'm like, no, it's not good enough. It's got to be done correctly. So going back to the main question was, I think the biggest hurdle for us, which was also the biggest blessing, was Instagram. When going into it, we had a budget that was set, although it was very low. I kind of, in the back of my head, I said, I have X amount of cash that I know I'm going to put into this house for upgrades. And what happened was, when Instagram kind of hit and we received that first email of our first collab, it was like, oh, wow, this is something. So now this house can be way nicer because of the way we're able to leverage our platform. Well, that was a blessing and also a curse, in a sense of, all of a sudden, as we grew our platform and our following, this house had to become nicer and nicer and nicer. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, this has to be a showpiece of a house. This has to be magazine worthy and magazine ready. And therefore, although we had a lot of collabs, there was other items that we had to throw in a budget for that was previously no budget for. So just as an example, like pavers, I wasn't even planning on. I think I was just planning on just doing some straw for my driveway or something. You know, as our spending went up, some of the other things was like, okay, we don't have to put concrete driveway in right away. We'll just do some straw or some hay or something just temporarily until we can get our CO. And then a couple years down the road, we can maybe do a really nice paver driveway. But all of a sudden, we get a collab for pavers. And it's like, okay, great. We got these pavers at a super discounted price. However, now I got to pay for somebody to install it. So you're talking, you know, that was 15 grand worth of paver dirt, or, you know, and the labor to do it. So I think that the financial aspect of it was probably the biggest hurdle that we had to overcome, of the money coming out of our pocket in order to make some of these upgrades.
Yeah. I'm not very familiar with how these collaborations work, the collabs as you call them, but how do they work? Like you mentioned, a paver company would say, hey, we'll give you these pavers at a discounted rate. And then what?
So
like how do those work?
as we've gone, that was obviously not our original intention. We didn't even know what that was when we first got into it. I just was sharing to share. Like, we thought it would be kind of fun to share our journey. And 6 months in, we got our first email. The company said, hey, can we put doors on your house in exchange for some pictures? And we were like, wow, that's really cool. And who else might be interested in doing that? Are there other brands that are doing this as well? So that kind of became my mission, is grow my platform, provide as much value as I could to my audience, and also reach out to as many brands as I possibly could, figure out who's in this game, who's trying to grow their social media presence, and who might want to work with us. So, and there can be different ways to work with them. We've worked with so many different brands in so many different ways. I always refer to it as kind of the wild, wild west. You know, like, it's not really defined in any black and white terms. I've helped brands like write their contracts just so they can have a process in place to work with the next person after they've worked with me. Some people, yes, will just product exchange only. Some people, maybe they'll give us an affiliate code where we'll get paid if anyone goes and buys the product off of our links. Sometimes they pay you, plus they give you product. So it kind of depends on the brand, who the influencer is, you know, what they're bringing to the table. But it really is just a game of figuring it out at this point.
Gotcha. So you encourage folks to build their own dream home, to follow in your footsteps. Why do you advise them to build their own home as opposed to hiring a builder? And we'll start with you, Noell, and then Daniel, I'll ask you the same question.
So for me, and the book isn't just building a home, it's also decorating, creating, renovations, just doing DIY projects within the home. So I think with COVID and everyone staying at home, and they're really just spending times in these spaces and realizing that maybe they don't really love them. And so there's a real outreach of people looking for information for how to do these things themselves. Partly because contractors are really hard to find in a lot of parts of the country. Like, we get calls constantly, as we don't work for outside customers anymore. We still get calls like, hey, are you doing projects? We can't find anybody. Who do you recommend? And I know it's not just here. We see it all over. And prices, they're able to raise their prices a lot because you can cherry pick the jobs. So it kind of leaves people in a bad situation. I can't find someone to hire. I want these things done. What can I do? And with the knowledge and advice that's out there right now through YouTube, our book, all kinds of other influencers that are creators that are sharing their work, there's ways to figure it out to do it yourself. Is there still a time and a place for a licensed GC? Absolutely. Definitely, they play a role, and there's times when that's a necessity. But this is for the person that maybe has the time and not the money, or just wants to learn this skill for themselves.
And Daniel, what about you? In your opinion, what are the advantages to taking on a renovation project or even a new build yourself, as opposed to hiring a contractor?
I think the advantages are, like I said before, is control. You're able to pivot at any moment. You don't have anybody that's kind of driving things. And I wouldn't say that a new build from ground up is for everyone. not unless you have the context and the years of experience. If I hadn't have had the construction knowledge that we had in the past 18 to 20 years of business, I would definitely have not tackled with myself. Now, and again, the reason for that is maybe I don't know everything there is to know about framing, but I know enough people, and I had employees on staff that had been framing for 20 to 25 years. So I felt comfortable in being able to tackle that ourselves. So there are some aspects that you just don't have the knowledge in, but if you have the contacts, then you can hire the people and you can work your way through it through the education that you can gain with these different people. I think that for me, why is it important? It's a sense of pride. I know that many people out there, they do have that passion for DIY projects. They do have the passion to learn. And I think that's a great opportunity. Even if it's a smaller renovation, it's a great opportunity to just go and learn. And YouTube has so many different sources. As Noell says, there's other creators out there that are teaching, okay, how do we rehab our laundry room, or how do we build a bookshelf? So much knowledge out there to be gained via the internet. And if you're a hands-on person and you're interested in doing something like that, then it's very easy to obtain that information. Now, again, I don't suggest wiring a whole home by yourself if you don't have the knowledge, if you're not a licensed electrician. Go out and find somebody who is, and then you can subcontract that to that person yourself. Mm-hmm. So, again, I think it all links back for me is a sense of pride that you can walk away from that job and say, I did this. And then 20 years down the road, you can drive by that house. If you still don't own it, you say, hey, look, I built that house, or I did that addition to that house. So it's a sense of pride.
Yeah. Like in my case, I can drive by and show my kids, hey, I worked on that project, and they can roll their eyes at me because like, yeah, Dad, you tell us that every time.
He can drive you past all the hotels that he helped do the brickwork on, and he will let you know.
That's right. So you have an audience of contractors here, and you can take a pass on this if you want to. You can answer it however you want. But Noell, I'll ask you first. What do you feel like is broken with the construction industry that contractors should really focus on the most? Like, what are they missing, in your opinion?
That's a tough one.
I would say the only thing that I've seen over the years is just a lack of clear direction and communication with the clients. Oftentimes, clients don't know what they're getting into. They don't know that their house, if it's a remodel, they don't know that their house is going to be completely displaced. They don't know that the length of time it's going to, be in shambles, if you will, depending on the type of remodel it is. So I would say communication is something that I've really tried my best, and all my staff, I really try to educate them and say, hey, look, people are going to have problems, and set those expectations ahead of time. We're going to open up a wall and there's going to be rotten wood somewhere, or there's going to be potential termites somewhere. And that's just a part of the process. So I think that my biggest thing is when I walk in and meet a client is educate them. Here's what can go wrong. And we're going to have some type of major hurdle here, and understand that all we're going to do is we're just going to address it, and we're going to keep moving. And that's just part of the process.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I heard one of my clients say, he was a kitchen and bath remodeler, and he said, look, they're not professional customers. They don't do this every day. So yeah, I think that's great advice. Noell, what about you? Any advice for contractors, like from your perspective? What are they missing?
What he said is really the best thing I would say too, is just setting those expectations. They're not doing this every day. Guys are, contractors are in and out of homes. They've maybe got a ton of jobs going at the same time. They're not, to them, it's old hat, Customers, this may be something they've been saving for 10 years to do. This may be a really big deal to them, and just really laying out those expectations for them.
Yeah, I think that's key. Expectations. I heard a quote that unclear expectations are premeditated resentments.
I love it.
I like that.
If you're not clear about expectations, somebody's going to resent the other person. And that goes for contractor customer relationships, employee employer relationships, husband wife relationships. Yeah, expectations. So, speaking of husband wife relationships, I've heard that married couples working together in a business can be kind of a tricky dynamic. I've worked with a few married couples, and it can be tricky. What are some tips that you guys can offer that have helped you work successfully in your business together? Daniel, what about you? I'll put you on the spot.
I would say giving clear jobs to one or the other. We know in our relationship as well as in our business who has strengths in some areas and who has strengths in or weaknesses in others. And it just so happens that we are able to play off of each other very well. And so, and it also helps that we both have a very similar design sense. We kind of enjoy the historic and different types of architecture that are very, very similar. Whereas if you get a husband that loves rustic and you got a wife that loves contemporary, those are pretty two tricky types of architecture and design that are going to be hard to mesh together. So thankfully we don't have that hurdle to overcome. But I would say setting up your business for a build or a renovation in a way that you have a clear direction of, okay, these are your tasks, these are my tasks. And then you're going to need help from time to time on one or the other. And then one person jumps in and helps out and vice versa.
Yeah. Good advice. Noelle, what about you? What are some tips that you can offer, some things you found to be helpful in a husband and wife team working together?
So, in addition to what he said, so you each have the things that you are stronger in and you lean into those, but truly trusting the other person. Like, that's his role, this is my role, and I'm going to just trust, even if I have questions, even if I'm not 100% sure what he's doing is what I would maybe do. I have to trust that he knows what he's doing, and he has to trust that I know what I'm doing, and focus on my job and not let my mind go over into his job and think I need to go correct that and fix that. But truly just leaning into my strengths and trusting that he's going to lean into his strength. And at the end of the day, we have the same goal. We have the same objective. We're on the same team. We're not in competition with each other. We're trying to accomplish the same thing. So really remembering that, even when it gets hard, even, when there's fights that come up and stressors that arise, just really leaning into each other's strengths and remembering the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's great advice. Trust.
Yes.
Stay in your lane. You guys probably haven't had any disagreements yet, so you may not be able to answer this question, but if a disagreement has come up at some point, have you found like a good way to address it that works well for you? Have you found any? Yeah.
Good.
Who wants to
I was just
go
going to
first?
Fights that we had in the build, he just had to admit I was right and everything worked out fine.
It's very simple.
Very simple.
That's right. I think there are some rules about that. Like there's these if-then statements. If you disagree with your wife, then rule number 2 is she's always right. And if there's any questions about that, refer back to rule number 2, right? So that probably does resolve a lot of that conflict. But Daniel, what about you? Have you found a good way to bring something up in a non-confrontational way that needs to be dealt with?
I feel like time. If you give each other some time to either think on the subject or take a break from it, and especially when you're in the middle of a rehab, you're just going to be exhausted. You're going to be stressed. And if you allow each other time to just get away, maybe go, take the kids to the park or go, whatever your hobby might be, go spend some time doing that for the day or even a couple of hours. And then you can reconvene and then come back and say, okay, I've thought about your perspective and maybe we can come up with some type of compromise. But oftentimes those, when things get heated and, your blood pressure skyrockets, you just don't think as clearly as what you might if you are calmed down.
Yeah. For me, it's usually the first 10 seconds when I get in trouble, when I react to things instead of respond. Yeah. So that's good advice. So let's talk about this concept of decision fatigue. A lot of builders, a lot of contractors who are working with clients, they unknowingly create decision fatigue. The client is just overwhelmed by all the decisions and selections that have to be made. Maybe they start off all excited, but then at some point they just get overwhelmed and either they shut down, they ghost you, or they just start making decisions to get them off their plate. Do you have any advice on how to avoid decision fatigue if you're going into a project like that where you have to make a lot of selections and decisions? Any advice on how to prevent decision fatigue? And Noelle, I'll start with you.
So I think just helping people hone into what their individual style is, because it can be so overwhelming. You go on Pinterest or you scroll Instagram, there's so many ideas out there and they're all beautiful. They're all amazing. But there are also so many different styles and so many different, architectures, but really leaning into what their individual style is and what kind of environment they're trying to create for themselves, and honing on that versus looking at all this inspiration and all these ideas. What are you trying to create? So for me personally, I love, like he was saying, older things, like an old general store was kind of the theme for my kitchen and my pantry, leaning into all that is old. So helping them really define their own style instead of just focusing on, which tile, which paint, which this, which that, focusing instead on what is your style, what are we creating here? And then when it does come up to these tough decisions, leaning back into that answer versus looking at all the different options out there.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice. Daniel, how about you? Any advice on how to prevent decision fatigue?
I think bringing in a third party is always a good idea. If you get to a certain point and you're just overwhelmed, bring in a designer and have that designer just give maybe a little nudge in the right direction. Maybe you only need them for a couple of hours. Maybe you want to continue to use them throughout the rest of your build or your rehab. But the third party perspective is invaluable, especially when your brain is so clouded. You don't know, again, you're trying to stick with a theme, like Noelle said. And if you completely choose architecture or even if you're picking out tile or if you're picking out colors, if you completely choose a style that goes away from where you were trying to originally go, it's like it almost seems like it could be like a hodgepodge of designs, and it confuses people as they walk in, or what is the overall theme of this structure. So bring in that designer. It'll help you have a clear vision, and maybe you just need them for, oh, wow, you know what? That's exactly what I was thinking, but I just couldn't put it on paper, and it gives you that nudge to go in the right direction.
Yeah, that is fantastic advice.
Their choices. Instead of just sitting there go pick tile, you have the whole wide world to choose from, every tile that exists in the whole world. Instead, maybe give them 3 to 5 choices that are different colors, different styles, and let them just focus on that little decision instead of just feeling overwhelmed by everything that's in the world.
Yeah, that's great advice. There's the paradox of choice. Some people would think, well, it's better to have, if I give my clients infinite choices, that's better, right? No, that actually creates more stress. Give them a catalog with 1,000 cabinet door pulls and hinges. Wow, that's going to cause decision fatigue pretty quickly. Yeah. And I really like that idea about bringing a third party in, because one thing I've noticed on the projects I worked on was as soon as the first coat of paint went up, and if a client walked through the space, they start questioning it. Like, oh, wow, that doesn't look right. Of course, they're looking at it without everything else in place. So then they have a tendency to start changing things. And it's really helpful to have an architect or a designer to say, this is good. It's okay. Don't start making changes. I've seen that mistake. And that's a great way to end up with a hodgepodge. Definitely. Yeah. Good advice.
On the couple fighting real quick, I got my thoughts back in process.
Let's hear it.
Okay. So, and we've got to talk about this in the book, actually. is taking time away from the business. You can't always do 8 to 5 or whatever it would normally be, but taking time to go to dinner together and not talk about the build. Take your kids out and not discuss what's going on at home, but truly focus on the moment and what you're doing away from the build or the business. And just remembering, why you love the other person, and that there's more to life than just being in business together will allow you to go back to that business with a whole new perspective. So that would be my biggest piece of advice.
That is fantastic advice. Fantastic advice. So let's talk about this. I'll ask you both the question. Noell, I'll ask you first. What is something that you believe to be true about business that some might think is a little unconventional or maybe even crazy?
I mean, the only biggest thing I can think of is kind of this whole conversation is just doing things the unorthodox way. You don't have to have a general contractor in place to design something. I knew nothing about social media when I started growing a platform, and here we are today with everything we have going on. You don't have to necessarily have a degree and do everything exactly the way that the world tells you it needs to be done to get to the finish line. There are many other ways that you can go about accomplishing the same thing instead of just this certain line.
Yeah. And I want to talk about social media. I have a follow-up question on that. And then Daniel, I'll ask you the same question about what you think is unconventional, but let's talk about social media. You have a huge social media following. How do you think about using social media? What is its purpose? And when you think about social media, how do you think about using it? Like, is it to inspire people, or are you trying to drive people to your website to read your blog? Are you just trying to add value? Like, tell me about how do you think about using social media?
So it can be different for each individual. So whatever your business is, whatever your philosophies are, it can be different. Every person can have a different reason that they're on social media. But at the end of the day, the main 3 things that you're wanting to use social media for is educate, inspire, entertain. Any piece of content that you do should do one of those 3 things. You may then be directing them to your blog or getting them to sign up on your email list or getting them to go buy something. But those 3 things are what you have to do with each piece of content to make any of those other things happen.
So educate, entertain, or inspire? Okay. So can you give us an example? Like, educate makes sense, entertain makes sense, but how do you think about inspiring people on social media?
Something simple, like as a mom of 5 that homeschools and helps run a business and does DIYs, like all these things that I do, just inspiring that it can be done. Like, there may be some other mom out there that thinks like, I can't, I'm overwhelmed, I'm drowning in laundry, my business with my husband is losing it, we can't communicate about things. And then she sees, oh, well, Noelle's doing it, I can do that too. And just inspire them with our lives and what we're doing, or just our home, being inspired by our design ideas. Any of the things that we're doing can just inspire them to live a better and happier life.
Yeah. Great stuff. Great stuff. Thank you for that. So Daniel, what about you? What's something you believe to be true about business that some might think is unconventional or maybe even a little crazy?
I think that's a tough question to answer. But the first thing that comes to my mind is years ago, I realized that I was working too much in my business rather than working on my business. And so I took a theme, and I would tell the guys this all the time, is if I'm on the job site, we as a company are losing money. We as a company, we are going backwards because my hands are too full working on a specific project or a specific problem. I'm not able to see the big picture and step outside and say, okay, here's the direction that our company needs to go in order to grow. And so I don't know that that's really a wild idea. That's probably an idea that people have been taught or hopefully have learned over the years. And as you're trying to scale your business and grow your business, you can't just be, initially when you start out, you're bootstrapping everything. But you'll quickly realize that I can't wear every single hat every single day of a business owner. It's just not possible. And so that's for me, that's the moment from one year to the next year we grew exponentially. And only because one single thing changed, I stopped showing up to the job site. And although it's tough, because that's the reason why you're there to begin with, because you have the passion to build and create and do a customized piece or whatever it might be. So it's a tricky line to walk, because the passion you have is the reason why you started the business to begin with. And now all of a sudden you're going to say, oh, I'm going to take that from you. But it's just kind of part of the growth process. Now, at any point, I could go back in, if I wanted to, I could go back in and say, hey, I want to go help, build this bookcase, or do, install a shower, or whatever it might be, just because I enjoy it, because I think it would be fun. I don't know that that's really that crazy, though. So I think I might have to have a little bit more time to think about that question.
I think it's a little unconventional. The book, The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, talks about that. And what you're talking about is like the difference between the entrepreneur who works on the business and the technician who works in the business. And it's a challenge, because that's what happened to me. I was a good project manager, said, I'm going to go build my own business. I'm going to start my own business. And I went into it to build. And then I realized, wow, there's a whole lot of other stuff that's required behind the scenes so I can build, and I wasn't any good at it. So making that transition is tough. And I think it surprises thousands of people every year that they have to be the entrepreneur. If they're not good at the entrepreneur stuff, they'll lose the opportunity to do the technical stuff that they're really passionate about, which is kind of sad. So yeah, I appreciate that. So I think that is an unconventional belief, but it's one that people need to hear. So I appreciate that. So let's talk about this book. Noell, tell us about the book that I think just came out in the last couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken. But talk about this book, where it came from, what it's about, and what people can expect when they read it.
Yes, it just launched last Tuesday, so a week tomorrow. And Create Your Dream Home on a Budget is the name of it. So our original goal with the house that we created, and with every project that we do, is to do it as inexpensively as possible. That's just my mindset has always been save a buck, not to shorten the project or do it cheap, in a cheap way, but just to do it for the best way I can for the least amount of money. So all the wisdom that, especially Daniel, he's been doing this type of work for 20 years. So he has more the business aspect of it and the technical aspect of it, whereas I have more the planning side of it and the just advice, I guess, side of it. And just taking all of that and giving it to people. We just have people all the time asking us questions like, how did you do it? How can I do this? What do I need to do to make it happen in my life? And just taking all of the advice, the templates, the budgets that we did, all of it. I mean, hours and hours and hours of research, and putting it into one book that someone could sit down, flip through it. First of all, it's beautiful. It's got gorgeous images. It's a great, beautiful book just to sit on the coffee table and be inspired by. But also use it as a handbook. If you're going to be doing a DIY project and you need to figure out your budget for it, you can sit down and utilize it. If you need a timeline for what this project's going to look like, you can use the book to figure that out. So it just takes all the tools that we found to be handy and puts them in one simple, easy to read format. I know there's some other books out there that I flipped through myself that were very technical, like, more for the contractor side, and maybe just so much information. Whereas ours is just more in layman's terms. Like, this is just us as a family, as a couple. This is what we did, and here's our information.
Great stuff. So I want to be cognizant of your time. You guys have been very generous with your time. So one last question. If people want to follow you, either website, social media, find your book, where are some of the best places for them to catch up with you and connect with you?
We are Jet Set Farmhouse on every social media platform, and jetsetfarmhouse.com is our blog.
Jet Set, and how do you spell
our
Jet?
Last name at Jett, and then Set, SET, Farmhouse.
Got it. I'll be sure to put those links in the show notes. So Jet Set Farmhouse. Great stuff. Well, thanks you all. Thanks to both of you for taking the time to be on here. Great stuff. And I appreciate the hard work you're doing, and definitely be following you on social media, and look forward to what you guys come up with. So hopefully the book launch goes well. And thanks for being on here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.